Picture this. You are a veteran cavalryman of the greatest war machine the world has ever seen. You have ridden across the freezing steppes of Asia. You have watched entire empires crumble beneath the hooves of your horse and painted the snow red with the blood of kings. But right now, you are not on a horse. You are trapped inside a rocking, vomit-soaked wooden box floating down a murky tropical river. The year is 1288. The midday sun is cooking you alive inside your thick leather and iron armor. Sweat stings your eyes. Your stomach churns with dysentery. You look at the dense, suffocating jungle walls on either side of the river. The trees are dead silent, but you can feel thousands of unseen eyes staring back at you. On land, you are a god of war. But here, crammed on this creaking ship with thousands of other miserable seasick men, you are just meat waiting for the slaughter. You are a soldier of the invincible Mongol Empire, and you are about to sail straight into the mouth of hell. Before diving into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the absolute nightmare that awaits this fleet, we need to look at the man who sent them to die. Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, sits on a throne that controls the largest contiguous land empire in human history. His domain stretches from the frozen forests of Russia to the scorching deserts of the Middle East, all the way to the shores of the Pacific Ocean. He has just swallowed the entire Song dynasty of China whole. His armies are a force of nature, an unstoppable tidal wave of compound bows, siege engines, and pure psychological terror. They do not just conquer. They butcher entire populations until the rivers run thick with corpses. When the Mongols knock on your city gates, you have exactly two choices. You kneel in the dirt, or you get erased from the map entirely. But there is a splinter lodged deep under Kublai Khan's fingernail. A tiny, aggressively humid strip of land hanging off the southern edge of China called Dai Viet, which is modern-day Vietnam. For decades, this incredibly stubborn kingdom has flatly refused to play by the rules of the empire. They will not submit. They will not pay the extortionate tributes demanded by the Khan. Worse, they have actively humiliated Mongol forces in previous invasions, using the claustrophobic jungle and brutal guerrilla tactics to bleed the invaders dry. For the absolute ruler of the known world, this defiance is not just a diplomatic insult, it is a geopolitical cancer that must be violently cut out. So Kublai Khan decides to stop playing games. He unleashes the apocalypse. He orders the assembly of a massive armada, a floating city of warships manned by tens of thousands of hardened killers. This is not a punitive raid, this is an extermination protocol. The strategy is brutally simple. Sail down the coast, punch through the river systems to bypass the impenetrable jungles and strike directly at the throat of the Vietnamese capital. The Mongol High Command believes sheer numbers and overwhelming force will instantly shatter the enemy's will to fight. They look at the map and view the Vietnamese defenders as nothing more than a minor speed bump, a collection of bugs waiting to be crushed under the boot of a titan. They are completely blinded by their own myth of invincibility. They are so intoxicated by a century of unbroken victories that they fail to see the massive trap being laid right beneath their ship hulls. They do not realize that the Vietnamese have entirely abandoned the concept of a fair fight. The defenders of Dai Viet know they cannot match the Mongol war machine sword for sword on an open field. Instead, they are preparing to turn the very water of their homeland into a weapon of mass destruction. The Mongol fleet is sailing down the Bach Dang River, expecting a swift, glorious victory. They have no idea they are navigating straight into a meticulously engineered graveyard. Let us strip away the romance of cavalry charges for a second. Imagine you are a Mongol horseman. You were born in the saddle. Your entire military doctrine relies on open plains, speed, flanking maneuvers, and showering the enemy with a relentless blizzard of arrows from horseback. You are the apex predator of the Eurasian steppe. But the steppe is thousands of miles away. Here in Dai Viet, your horse is not a weapon. It is a liability. It is a giant, starving, terrified creature sinking up to its knees in putrid, stinking mud. The heat is not just uncomfortable. It is a physical weight pressing down on your chest, suffocating you inside your boiled leather and iron scale armor. The humidity makes it impossible to sweat properly. Your skin rots under your clothes. The air is thick with swarms of mosquitoes carrying invisible killers your immune system has never encountered. Malaria, dengue fever, and dysentery are tearing through your ranks faster than any enemy blade. You watch the toughest warriors you know, men who survived the brutal sieges of Chinese megacities, shivering to death in their own filth, coughing up blood in the sweltering heat. And then there is the jungle itself. It is a claustrophobic green hell. You cannot see 50 feet in any direction. The canopy above blocks out the sun, trapping the moisture and the smell of rotting vegetation. Every shadow hides a snare. Every rustling leaf could be a poisoned dart or a bamboo spike smeared with feces buried in the mud and waiting to impale your foot. The Vietnamese do not line up in neat formations on an open field. They refuse to give you the satisfaction of a pitched battle. They are ghosts. They strike at midnight, slitting the throats of your sentries and tossing fire onto your supply carts. By the time you draw your curved sword and sound the alarm, they have already dissolved back into the impenetrable foliage. This is the agonizing reality of asymmetric warfare. The Mongol generals, men who have crushed ancient empires and rewritten the map of the world, are pulling their hair out in blind frustration. They are punching water. Every time they swing their massive military fist, the Vietnamese simply melt away, leaving the invaders to exhaust themselves hitting empty air. The psychological toll is devastating. Paranoia spreads through the encampments like a plague. You cannot sleep because the jungle is always screaming with strange animal noises, and you know the enemy is out there watching your every move. This frustration, this desperate need to force a decisive, bloody confrontation is exactly what the defenders are counting on. They are slowly bleeding the Mongol war machine, depriving them of food, sleep, and sanity. The Mongols are accustomed to living off the land, plundering local villages to feed their massive armies and their thousands of horses. But the Vietnamese have anticipated this hunger. They have stripped the countryside bare. They have evacuated the civilians, burned their own rice fields to ash, and poisoned their own wells. They are starving the invaders from the inside out, turning the environment itself into a weapon of mass starvation. The Mongol High Command slowly realizes their land campaign is bogging down into a catastrophic war of attrition. They are dying without even seeing the faces of their killers. They need a quick victory. They need to resupply their starving troops. And they desperately need to crush the Vietnamese resistance before the tropical diseases wipe out their entire invasion force. This boiling desperation forces them to rely heavily on their massive naval fleet. They believe the winding rivers are their highway to victory, a way to bypass the endless green hell of the jungle and strike directly at the heart of the resistance. They are right about the rivers being a highway. They are just completely wrong about the destination. Driven mad by the sweltering, suffocating torment of the tropics and blinded by their own arrogance, They are rushing headlong toward a watery grave. They are sailing straight toward the Bach Dang River. The Mongol war machine operated on a very simple economic principle. Conquest pays for itself. You march into a foreign land, you smash its armies, and then you take its wealth, its food, and its people. This was the promised reward for the soldiers hacking their way through the Vietnamese malaria zone. They were told that at the end of this green hell was Thang Long, the glittering capital of Dai Viet. It was the ultimate prize, a sprawling city packed with grain silos, treasures, and a population waiting to be enslaved. The starving, disease-ridden invaders pushed forward with desperate, feverish energy, dreaming of the feast that awaited them behind the city walls. But when the Mongol vanguard finally breaks through the tree line and sees the great capital, there is no glittering prize. There is only a massive, hollowed-out carcass bleeding black smoke into the sky. They smash through the city gates, but their battle cries echo off empty streets. There is no one to kill. There is no one to subjugate. The markets are gone. The palaces are stripped bare. The massive grain silos, the very thing the Mongol army desperately needs to survive, are nothing but smouldering piles of black ash. Every well has been deliberately poisoned with rotting animal carcasses. Every usable scrap of material has been taken or destroyed. The Vietnamese did not just evacuate their capital, they murdered it to ensure the Mongols could not feed on its corpse. This is the brutal reality of the scorched earth tactic, a strategy so merciless it is hard for a modern mind to fully comprehend. To execute this, the Vietnamese people had to pack up whatever they could carry and set fire to their own ancestral homes. They had to burn the temples where they worshipped, destroy the workshops where they made their living, and salt the earth of their own gardens. It is an act of supreme, collective self-mutilation. But it is also a declaration of absolute, terrifying resolve. By burning Thang Long to the ground, the Vietnamese are sending a clear message to the invaders. You cannot take what we are willing to destroy. You are not fighting a king protecting his gold. You are fighting a people who will burn their own world to the ground just to watch you starve in the ashes, and starve they do. Taking an empty, burning city is a strategic nightmare. The Mongols now sit on the throne of Dai Viet, but it is a throne in the middle of a wasteland. An invasion force of this magnitude, along with their tens of thousands of war horses, consumes a staggering amount of calories every single day. Without the captured grain to sustain them, the logistical spine of the Mongol invasion simply snaps. The hunger sets in quickly, turning the world's most disciplined army into a horde of emaciated scavengers. Men who were previously loaded down with looted gold are now trading it for handfuls of moldy roots. The prized Mongol horses, the absolute engines of their military supremacy, are dying of starvation. Soon, the cavalrymen are forced to slaughter their own mounts just to survive, drinking horse blood and chewing on tough, stringy meat while roasting in the suffocating tropical sun. They are stranded in the ashes of Thang Long, surrounded by hundreds of miles of hostile jungle, slowly suffocating in a prison without walls. The psychological blow is just as devastating as the physical one. The Mongols are used to breaking the spirit of their enemies through sheer, overwhelming terror, but here the terror has been turned against them. They are being hunted by an invisible enemy, trapped in a dead city, and slowly erased by starvation and disease. The supreme commander of the Mongol land forces, Prince Togun, realizes with mounting horror that he has not conquered Dai Viet. He has simply marched his entire army into a massive, meticulously prepared tomb. To save his starving forces from total annihilation, Togon needs food, and he needs a secure escape route. His only hope lies in the massive Mongol supply fleet, a naval armada carrying millions of pounds of grain, currently trying to navigate the treacherous coastal rivers to reach the capital. He sends desperate orders for the fleet to advance at all costs, but what Togon does not know is that the Vietnamese are already waiting for those ships. The bait has been swallowed, and the jaws of the trap are about to snap shut. History loves to sanitize its heroes. We build marble statues, paint glowing portraits, and write poetic textbooks about noble generals who fought for honor and righteousness. But when the greatest killing machine in human history is burning your country to ash, honor does not save you. Ruthlessness saves you. The man orchestrating this living nightmare for the Mongols is not a saint in shining armor. He is a cold, calculating architect of violence named Tran Hung Dao. He is the supreme commander of the Vietnamese forces, and he understands a fundamental truth about war that the panicked nobles in his royal court simply cannot grasp. You cannot negotiate with a meat grinder. You either break its teeth or you get ground into paste. Right now, the Vietnamese king is staring into the abyss. His capital is a smoking crater. His people are hiding in the disease-infested jungles. The sheer psychological weight of the Mongol invasion is crushing the royal court. Whispers of surrender are echoing through the damp, makeshift command tents. The king, terrified of seeing his entire civilization erased from existence, actually asks Tran Hung Dao if they should just lay down their weapons and submit to the Khan. It is a brutally logical question. Submission means survival. You pay the tribute, you kneel in the dirt, and the killing stops. But Tran Hung Dao looks his sovereign dead in the eye and delivers a response that fundamentally alters the trajectory of the medieval world. He does not offer a polite political compromise. He offers a violent ultimatum. He tells the king, if your majesty wishes to surrender, you must cut off my head first. This is not a dramatic bluff. It is a psychological lock. Tran Hung Dao is violently slamming the door shut on any possibility of compromise. He knows that the moment a single crack of doubt appears in the leadership, the entire defense will shatter like cheap glass. To ensure his soldiers understand exactly what is at stake, he pens a military manifesto to his officers. It is not a polite call to arms. It is a terrifying, blood-soaked document of pure, unadulterated hatred. He writes that he cannot sleep, that his heart is physically rotting in his chest at the sight of Mongol envoys strutting through their lands like arrogant dogs. He explicitly states his ultimate desire is to flay their skin, swallow their livers, and drink their blood. He promises that even if his own body is chopped into 100 pieces and his bones are scattered in the dust, he will smile as long as the Mongols are destroyed. This is not the rhetoric of a politician. This is the rhetoric of a man weaponizing spite. He demands that every single soldier in his army cross the point of no return. Across the hidden jungle camps, Vietnamese troops strip off their armor and begin tattooing 2 words onto their arms in jet black ink. Sat that. Kill the Mongols. It is a brilliant, terrifying psychological tactic. By permanently branding their own flesh with a death threat against the invaders, the Vietnamese soldiers are deliberately erasing their own escape routes. If you are captured with those words on your arm, the Mongols will not take you as a slave. They will slowly skin you alive. Tran Hung Dao has backed his own army against a cliff where their only 2 options are total victory or a horrific, agonizing death. He has successfully forged an army of ghosts who have already accepted their own mortality. They are no longer afraid of the invincible Mongol cavalry because they already consider themselves dead men. And while the Mongol generals are blindly thrashing around in the suffocating heat, dying of starvation in the ashes of the capital, Tran Hung Dao is staring at the water. He knows that Prince Toghon is bleeding out. He knows the Mongols desperately need their massive naval supply fleet to survive. He knows exactly where that fleet has to sail. He is not just trying to outlast the invasion anymore, he is building an execution chamber. He looks at the dark, turbulent currents of the Bach Dang River, and he sees the perfect graveyard. If you are a Mongol commander, your understanding of geography is based on solid ground. You conquer plains, you conquer mountains, and you conquer cities. To you, a river is nothing but a flat, wet highway. You build a boat, you put your men on it, and you sail from point A to point B. It is a simple logistical equation, but the Bach Dang is not a highway. It is a living, breathing monster, and the Mongols are completely oblivious to its heartbeat. The Bach Dang River is an estuary, a violent collision point where the heavy, muddy, fresh water of the Vietnamese highlands smashes into the immense saltwater currents of the Gulf of Tonkin. Because of this geographical bottleneck, the river is subjected to one of the most extreme tidal ranges on the planet. We are not talking about a gentle ripple on the shoreline. We are talking about millions of gallons of water violently rushing inland, raising the water level by over 10 feet in a matter of hours, and then rapidly, violently sucking back out to sea. It is a massive, unstoppable hydraulic pump driven by the gravitational pull of the moon. Now put yourself in the boots of a Mongol naval captain. You grew up on the dry, endless oceans of grass in Central Asia. You have never seen the ocean. You do not comprehend the concept of a tide. In your mind, rivers flow in one direction, downhill, all the time. The idea that a massive body of water could suddenly reverse course and drop 10 feet in an afternoon is completely alien to your understanding of physics. You are commanding a fleet of massive, deep, draft wooden supply ships loaded to the brim with grain, weapons, and thousands of desperately needed reinforcements. You are sailing blindly into a gravitational buzzsaw. The ships the Mongols are using are not nimble rivercraft. They are massive, ocean-going junks built by subjugated Chinese shipwrights. They are floating fortresses, heavy and cumbersome, requiring deep, stable water to maneuver. When the tide is high, the Bach Dang easily accommodates these wooden behemoths. The surface is deceptively calm, a wide brown mirror hiding the churning chaos beneath. To the desperate, starving Mongol generals waiting inland, this fleet is their salvation. To the sailors on board, the wide river looks like a clear, easy path to victory. Tran Hung Dao knows this. He has grown up on these waters. He knows the smell of the mud when the tide recedes. He knows the exact lunar cycle. He knows the precise hour, down to the minute, when the ocean stops pushing and starts pulling. He realizes that he does not need to build a massive siege engine to destroy the Mongol armada. The moon has already built the engine. The ocean is providing the horsepower. He simply needs to provide the teeth. This is the absolute pinnacle of medieval warfare tactics. It is not about lining up more men on a field, it is about weaponizing the environment itself. Tran Hung Dao looks at the Bach Dang at high tide. It looks wide, deep, and perfectly safe for a massive fleet. But he knows that in a few hours that water will vanish, exposing a treacherous, jagged riverbed of mud and stone. If a heavy ship is caught in the wrong place when the water gets sucked out to sea, it will run aground. It will become a stranded, helpless wooden whale. But running them aground is not enough for Tran Hung Dao. Remember, he wants total, apocalyptic annihilation. He does not just want the ships to get stuck. He wants the river to physically rip their hulls open and spill their guts into the water. To do that, he needs to modify the riverbed. He needs to build a trap so massive so invisible and so deadly that once the Mongols sail into it, the very water beneath them will turn into a bed of nails. And so he gives an order that will require the sweat, blood, and absolute silence of tens of thousands of peasants. He orders the construction of a man-made forest beneath the waves. Picture this. Under the pitch-black canopy of the tropical night, tens of thousands of men are moving in absolute silence. No torches, no shouted orders, just the heavy, rhythmic thud of axes biting into wood, blending with the drone of bloodthirsty insects. This is not an army marching to a battlefield. This is a massive labor force of Vietnamese farmers, fishermen, and craftsmen. These are the very people the Mongol army proudly views as nothing more than grass beneath their horses' hooves, and they are silently building a colossal guillotine deep beneath the surface of the Bach Dang River. They are cutting ironwood. If you have never touched tropical ironwood, you need to understand it is not like anything found in western forests. It is incredibly dense, impossibly heavy, and hard as cold steel. When you throw it in the water, it does not float. It sinks like a stone and can sit in suffocating mud for centuries without rotting. These peasants are using pure, brutal manual labor to fell these massive trees, strip the bark, and sharpen one end. But Tran Hung Dao's ruthlessness does not stop there. A sharpened log is not enough to punch through the thick hulls of Mongol warships. He orders blacksmiths to cap every single wooden spike with red-hot, forged iron. Each spike is a massive spear, dozens of feet long and weighing hundreds of pounds. And they are not making a few of them. They are forging tens of thousands. Next comes the most difficult and dangerous phase of the entire operation, planting this forest of death beneath the waves. This must be done at the exact moment the tide hits its absolute lowest point, exposing the foul-smelling, muddy riverbed. Men waist-deep in the sucking muck heave the massive logs onto their shoulders. They use heavy wooden mallets to drive tens of thousands of these stakes into the riverbed at perfectly calculated angles. The iron tips do not point straight up. They are angled backward, pointing aggressively against the natural flow of the retreating tide. This is a masterpiece of medieval engineering. If the stakes are driven too high, the Mongol ships will spot them at high tide and easily avoid the trap. If they are driven too low, they will not pierce the hulls when the water drains away. Every calculation must be exact down to the inch. Vietnamese divers have to hold their breath and plunge into the freezing, murky water to inspect each individual spike, ensuring they are entirely invisible at high tide, yet perfectly positioned to act as surgical scalpels when the ocean sucks the river dry. And all of this is happening right under the enemy's nose. Just miles away, tens of thousands of Mongol cavalrymen are slowly dying of disease and starvation, desperately waiting for their supply fleet. They have no idea that just beneath the calm surface of the water they stare at every day, a slaughterhouse is being meticulously assembled. When the final stake is driven into the mud and the rising tide conceals the massive trap, the Bach Dang River returns to its deceptive, peaceful illusion. The board is set. Now Tran Hung Dao just needs to wait for the arrogant prey to walk through the door. Let us talk about the fatal anatomy of arrogance. If you are a commanding officer in the Mongol Empire, your ego is not just a personality trait, it is a military doctrine. You have been conditioned by decades of unbroken global conquest to believe that you are the physical manifestation of divine punishment. And no one embodies this terrifying hubris more than General Omar, the man commanding the Mongol naval vanguard. He is a hardened veteran, a man who has burned cities to the ground and drowned populations in their own rivers. As he stands on the command deck of his massive flagship, looking at the mouth of the Bach Dang River, He is not thinking about caution. He is thinking about slaughter. He has hundreds of massive, deep-draft wooden warships behind him, packed with thousands of heavily armed Marines and enough grain to feed an empire. He is the unstoppable force, and he is ready to crush whatever pathetic resistance Dai Viet has left to offer. Then, out of the humid morning mist, the Vietnamese navy finally appears. But it is a joke. It is not an armada. It is an absolute insult. Omar looks over the railing of his floating fortress and sees a handful of shallow-draft river skiffs. They are practically oversized canoes manned by men wearing no heavy armor, rowing out to meet the greatest naval force on the planet. To the battle-hardened Mongols, this does not look like a military engagement. It looks like a suicide cult. The Vietnamese boats are so small that the Mongol Marines have to physically lean over the towering sides of their junks just to look down at them. The small boats paddle into range and initiate the attack. It is entirely pathetic. They loose a few scattered volleys of arrows that harmlessly bounce off the thick, iron-reinforced hulls of the Mongol ships. They bang on gongs, scream insults, and hurl a few crude firepots that fizzle out in the brown water. It is the tactical equivalent of throwing a pebble at a charging rhinoceros. And then, exactly as quickly as they appeared, the Vietnamese sailors seem to realize the horrifying reality of what they have just done. Panic visibly sets in. The small boats violently turn around, the men rowing with frantic, uncoordinated desperation, fleeing straight back up the Bach Dang River. This is the psychological trigger. Tran Hung Dao is not fighting Omar's ships. He is fighting Omar's pride. He knows that a man like Omar cannot simply ignore an insult from an inferior enemy. He cannot watch these ragged peasants throw rocks at his floating palace and let them row away to tell the tale. The sheer disrespect of the skirmish causes a biological reaction in the Mongol commander. The blood rushes to his head. Logic evaporates. The meticulous wariness required to navigate a foreign tidal estuary is completely overridden by a blinding, venomous desire to grind these fleeing boats into sawdust. Omar screams the order to pursue. The drums aboard the massive junks begin a relentless driving beat. The massive sails catch the wind off the Gulf of Tonkin, and the entire Mongol armada surges forward, pouring into the mouth of the river. They are hunting. The Marines on the decks are laughing, pointing at the frantically retreating Vietnamese skiffs, placing bets on who will get to slit their throats first. They are so focused on the chase, so consumed by the thrill of running down a terrified prey, that they do not look at the riverbanks. They do not notice that the water level is sitting at its absolute point. The heavy Mongol ships glide smoothly and effortlessly up the Bach Dang. The deep water provides perfect buoyancy for their massive wooden hulls. They are moving fast, closing the distance, driven by the pure, intoxicating arrogance of an empire that believes it cannot be killed. They have absolutely no idea that right beneath their feet, sliding silently just inches below the keels of their ships, are thousands of iron-tipped wooden spikes. The Mongols have just eagerly, voluntarily sailed their entire war machine directly into the center of the kill box. The bait has done its job. Now Tran Hung Dao just needs to wait for the moon to pull the water away. You are riding the adrenaline high of the hunt. The massive sails of the Mongol fleet belly out, catching the coastal winds, pushing thousands of tons of wood and iron deeper into the Vietnamese interior. The peasant boats are just a few hundred yards ahead, rowing frantically, their crews looking back in sheer terror. You can practically taste the blood in the water, but in your bloodlust you fail to notice the subtle shift beneath your feet. The ship is no longer gliding smoothly. The steering oars are suddenly heavy, fighting against a current that was not there 10 minutes ago. The ocean has stopped pushing inland. The gravitational pull of the moon has shifted, and millions of gallons of water are now violently rushing back out toward the Gulf of Tonkin. It does not happen slowly. The tidal shift on the Bach Dang is a churning, catastrophic evacuation. The river is literally draining itself. You notice the muddy banks of the estuary rapidly rising around you, exposing slick, foul-smelling roots. The water level is dropping by the foot, transforming the wide, deep highway into a narrow, treacherous funnel. The massive, deep-draft Chinese junk suddenly feels sluggish, their keels dragging dangerously close to the invisible riverbed. Panic begins to ripple through the Mongol helmsmen as they desperately try to slow their momentum, but it is entirely too late. The sheer, kinetic mass of the fleet packed tightly together in the narrowing channel makes any evasive maneuvering impossible. They are a runaway train with no brakes, sliding blindly down a drain. Then you hear it. It is not the sound of artillery or the clash of swords. It is a deep, agonizing, splintering groan erupting from the very bowels of the ship next to you. A massive war junk suddenly jolts to a violent, unnatural halt. Men on deck are hurled forward by the sudden kinetic shock, slamming into the wooden railings, their heavy armor clattering against the deck. The ship begins to list sharply to starboard, groaning like a dying animal. It has not hit a sandbar, it has been impaled. Beneath the churning brown water, the iron-tipped forest of Tran Hung Dao has found its prey. As the water drops, the massive wooden ships settle directly onto the thousands of hardened limb-wood spikes anchored deep into the mud. The weight of the ships becomes their own executioner. Thousands of tons of displacement press down onto iron points angled perfectly to catch the retreating hulls. The forged iron tips shear through the thick, waterproofed planks like a hot spear through a corpse. Muddy water immediately geysers into the lower decks, flooding the grain holds and drowning the men below in the pitch-black dark before they even understand what is happening. The horror is not isolated, it is a synchronized, cascading catastrophe. The Bach Dang River rapidly becomes a slaughterhouse of wood and canvas. As the water continues its terrifying retreat, ship after ship slams into the submerged stakes. The heavy junks crash into the rear of the impaled vessels ahead of them, shattering oars and crushing men caught between the splintering hulls. The perfectly organized Mongol armada is instantly reduced to a tangled, bleeding pileup of ruined naval architecture. Some ships are pinned completely through, suspended awkwardly above the mud, as the water vanishes beneath them, their structural ribs snapping under the unnatural stress. Other ships have their bottoms entirely ripped out, settling deep into the suffocating muck, turning into immediate, immovable prisons for the thousands of heavily armored Marines trapped on board. Look at General Omar now, the swaggering conqueror who just an hour ago was dreaming of burning another civilization to the ground. He is standing on the deck of a crippled, tilting flagship, listening to the muffled screams of his drowning men and the terrifying symphony of snapping timber. His invincible cavalry is utterly useless. His overwhelming numbers are completely meaningless. His ships cannot sail, they cannot turn, and they cannot retreat. They are pinned like grotesque insects to a massive wooden corkboard. The water has abandoned them, leaving them exposed, immobile, and bleeding out in the mud. The trap has snapped shut with perfect mathematical cruelty. And as the terrified Mongols stare out over their ruined, impaled fleet, stranded in the foul-smelling wasteland of the riverbed, they hear a new sound echoing from the jungle banks. The drums. The real Vietnamese army has finally arrived, and they have not come to negotiate. Look at the river. It is no longer water. It is a thick slaughterhouse of mud, splintered wood and blood. The agonizing groans of the shattered ships are now drowned out by a far more terrifying sound, the massive war drums of Dai Viet echoing from the jungle banks. You are standing on the deck of a sinking Mongol war junk, the foul-smelling mud pouring over the bow, and you look up at the sky. The sky is no longer blue. It is entirely blotted out by a monsoon of flaming arrows. The suffocating tropical air is suddenly thick with the smell of sulfur and burning flesh. Tran Hung Dao does not just want to drown this fleet, he wants to incinerate it. Thousands of fire arrows tear through the humid mist, burying themselves deep into the massive canvas sails and pitch-soaked decks. These dry, wooden behemoths designed to weather ocean storms are instantly transformed into massive, immobile bonfires. The flames spread with a terrifying, merciless speed, leaping from one impaled ship to the next. The Mongol armada, the pride of Kublai Khan's war machine, is now a miles-long chain of screaming torches lighting up the Bach Dang River, and now the underdogs move in for the kill. The tiny Vietnamese skiffs, those pathetic little canoes that General Omar laughed at just an hour ago, now glide effortlessly through the maze of hidden spikes. Their draft is far too shallow to be caught by the trap. They navigate the deadly gaps with lethal precision. The Vietnamese Marines approach the burning ships not to fight a battle, but to execute a massacre. They use long spears to thrust upward, impaling the desperate Mongol soldiers who are clinging to the railings. If you are a Mongol soldier right now, every single advantage that made you the conqueror of the world has turned into a death sentence. Your heavy iron scale armor, the very thing that saved your life a dozen times on the open steppes, is now an anchor. As the flames consume the deck, you face a bitter choice: burn alive or jump into the thick, sucking mud below. Thousands jump, but you cannot swim in a mudflat wearing 60 pounds of iron. They sink immediately. The river writhes, pulling them down into the dark, filling their lungs with brackish water and silt. The slaughter is absolute. There is no white flag. There is no taking prisoners for ransom. The Vietnamese soldiers bearing the words, "Kill the Mongols," tattooed into their skin, are executing their blood oath to the letter. They board the burning wreckage, hacking down anyone left breathing. They swing their blades until their arms go numb. Eventually, the water drains away so completely that even the shallow Vietnamese boats cannot move. The river is completely clogged. It is choked with thousands of corpses, layers of armored bodies piled on top of each other, wedged between the ironwood stakes and the splintered remains of the greatest navy on earth. In just a few short hours, an invincible army has been completely erased from the map. Omar's supreme arrogance has been extinguished in mud and blood. The most ruthless war machine in human history was not defeated by a larger army or superior technology. It was chewed up and spit out by a river, a lunar cycle, and the unimaginable fury of a people who refused to die. Picture this. You are an imperial messenger, sprinting through the cavernous halls of Kanbalik, the glittering capital of the Mongol Empire. You are holding a scroll that feels heavier than a block of lead. You are about to walk into the throne room of Kublai Khan, the undisputed master of the world, and tell him that his invincible armada is gone, not defeated, erased. You have to tell the man who just conquered all of China that a tiny strip of jungle and a muddy river just swallowed his finest generals, tens of thousands of his elite marines, and his entire logistical supply chain. You know that messengers bearing bad news rarely leave this room with their heads attached to their shoulders. But the humiliation does not end at the river. Hundreds of miles away, Prince Togon, the supreme commander of the land invasion, receives the news that his naval lifeline has been brutally severed. The realization hits him like a physical blow. He is stranded in a hostile, disease-ridden jungle surrounded by a starving army, and the ghosts of Dai Viet are rapidly closing in. The retreat that follows is not a tactical military withdrawal, it is a chaotic, blood-soaked stampede. The once proud Mongol cavalry is hunted like wild game through the narrow, suffocating mountain passes. Togon himself, a royal prince of the greatest empire on earth, is so terrified of the Vietnamese guerrillas that he is forced to hide inside a hollowed-out bronze water pipe, being frantically dragged across the border by his surviving men just to escape the relentless shower of poisoned arrows. It is an image of absolute, pathetic defeat that will permanently stain the legacy of the Khan. When Kublai Khan finally processes the full extent of this catastrophe, something fundamental shatters inside the Mongol war machine. It is not just the loss of ships or men. Empires can easily replace wood and flesh. What dies that day is the psychological terror that fuels their global dominance. The myth of Mongol invincibility, the terrifying aura that made entire kingdoms surrender without throwing a single punch, is drowned in the Bach Dang River. Dai Viet does not just survive the apocalypse, they provide the rest of the world with a violent, agonizing blueprint on how to kill a god. The Battle of Bach Dang stands as the ultimate masterclass in asymmetrical warfare. It forces us to strip away our romanticized notions of honor on the battlefield. Tran Hung Dao did not win by fighting fair. He won because he understood that fairness is a luxury reserved for the doomed. He weaponized the suffocating climate, he weaponized the hunger of his enemies, and ultimately he weaponized the gravitational pull of the moon itself. He looked at the invincible Mongol war machine and recognized it for what it truly was, a massive, lumbering beast entirely dependent on momentum. By dragging that beast into the mud and severing its arteries, he proved that no empire is truly immortal. Today, the Bach Dang River flows quietly into the Gulf of Tonkin. The ruined wooden ships have long since rotted away, and the iron spikes are buried deep beneath centuries of silent silt. But the psychological scars of that day permanently reshaped the medieval world. The expansion of the largest contiguous land empire in human history was violently, abruptly halted by a kingdom of farmers who simply refused to be erased. If you made it this far, you are clearly someone who values the deep, gritty, and often uncomfortable truths of our past. If this story of survival and absolute defiance moved you, please make sure you are subscribed and have the bell notification turned on. I have a lot more forgotten history to uncover with you. And before you go, I have a question for you to answer in the comments. When faced with an overwhelming, unstoppable force in your own life, do you try to meet it head-on, or do you wait for the tide to turn and use its own weight against it? I will be reading your thoughts below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next chapter of history. Look at the river. It is no longer water, it is a thick slaughterhouse of mud, splintered wood, and blood. The agonizing groans of the shattered ships are now drowned out by a far more terrifying sound, the massive war drums of Dai Viet echoing from the jungle banks. You are standing on the deck of a sinking Mongol war junk, the foul-smelling mud pouring over the bow, and you look up at the sky. The sky is no longer blue. It is entirely blotted out by a monsoon of flaming arrows. The suffocating tropical air is suddenly thick with the smell of sulfur and burning flesh. Tran Hung Dao does not just want to drown this fleet, he wants to incinerate it. Thousands of fire arrows tear through the humid mist, burying themselves deep into the massive canvas sails and pitch-soaked decks. These dry wooden behemoths designed to weather ocean storms are instantly transformed into massive, immobile bonfires. The flames spread with a terrifying, merciless speed, leaping from one impaled ship to the next. The Mongol armada, the pride of Kublai Khan's war machine, is now a miles-long chain of screaming torches lighting up the Bach Dang River. And now the underdogs move in for the kill. The tiny Vietnamese skiffs, those pathetic little canoes that General Omar laughed at just an hour ago, now glide effortlessly through the maze of hidden spikes. Their draft is far too shallow to be caught by the trap. They navigate the deadly gaps with lethal precision. The Vietnamese Marines approach the burning ships not to fight a battle, but to execute a massacre. They use long spears to thrust upward, impaling the desperate Mongol soldiers who are clinging to the railings. If you are a Mongol soldier right now, every single advantage that made you the conqueror of the world has turned into a death sentence. Your heavy iron scale armor, the very thing that saved your life a dozen times on the open steppes, is now an anchor. As the flames consume the deck, you face a bitter choice. Burn alive, or jump into the thick, sucking mud below. Thousands jump, but you cannot swim in a mudflat wearing 60 pounds of iron. They sink immediately. The river writhes, pulling them down into the dark, filling their lungs with brackish water and silt. The slaughter is absolute. There is no white flag. There is no taking prisoners for ransom. The Vietnamese soldiers, bearing the words "Kill the Mongols" tattooed into their skin, are executing their blood oath to the letter. They board the burning wreckage, hacking down anyone left breathing. They swing their blades until their arms go numb. Eventually the water drains away so completely that even the shallow Vietnamese boats cannot move. The river is completely clogged. It is choked with thousands of corpses, layers of armored bodies piled on top of each other, wedged between the ironwood stakes and the splintered remains of the greatest navy on earth. In just a few short hours, an invincible army has been completely erased from the map. Omar's supreme arrogance has been extinguished in mud and blood. The most ruthless war machine in human history was not defeated by a larger army or superior technology. It was chewed up and spit out by a river, a lunar cycle, and the unimaginable fury of a people who refused to die.